Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, of course, I thought that I would give my little fight analyzation and my fight review of the very decent heavyweight bout that, of course, occurred today between Mr. Joseph Parker and Joe Joyce. And, of course, for those of you that have not heard the news, we do have to congratulate Mr. Joe Joyce for being the victor. And not only was he victorious in this fight when it comes down to it, but he also is now the only man and the first man to defeat Joseph Parker by knockout, by KO, or TKO. But I believe in this fight that it was counted as a KO because I believe that Joseph Parker anyway was counted out by the referee. So we'll see all know what ends up happening there. But congratulations to Mr. Joe Joyce overall for putting on, in my view, a very, very good performance. There were certain rounds, in my opinion, to where it was decently competitive. But just like I thought that Joe Joyce was going to come in here as the more confident fighter. You're talking about a fighter that is an undefeated fighter and all in all has very, very good power. Certain overall fundamentals that, in my opinion, I would question, but he also, all in all, has certain things that do make him fundamentally sound. And Joe Joyce in this fight did exactly what I said that he would need to in order to beat Mr. Joseph Parker. As I stated all in all before heading into this fight, Joseph Parker, in my view, more than likely was going to be the fighter fighting on the back foot, and Joe Joyce was probably going to be the fighter, even though, maybe sometimes he does like to fight on the back foot, just as Joseph Parker sometimes likes to fight on the front foot. But more than likely, Joseph Parker was going to be the guy on the back foot, and Joe Joyce was going to be the guy that was coming forward and trying to break down his opponent incrementally, round by round. And that is pretty much exactly what he did. If you're personally wondering what I scored this fight, before the stoppage, I believe that I had Joseph Parker winning about 3 rounds. I think that I gave him round two, round four, and then I think I gave him round 10, and that was pretty much about it. I think Joseph Parker, for his skill set, gave it a valiant effort. I think that he showed a great amount of heart. He was hurt through the majority of the fight, excuse me, from what it seemed, but it just was not enough. Joseph Parker showed a lot of heart and he showed all in all a lot of grit, but you need more than just grit and determination overall and a lot of heart to win a fight. You need boxing IQ and you need an A grade skill set. And Joseph Parker does not really have either of those on the A grade level. And I've been saying this for a very, very long time about Mr. Joseph Parker. I always thought that he was a very talented athlete. I always thought that there were certain things that made him a talented fighter. But was he ever, in my opinion, a great fighter even on his best day? Absolutely not. And people are finally starting to see what I've been talking about. It just is what it is. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. First of all, I'm going to break down the fight of what I seen and why Joe Joyce was able to win the way that he was able to. Well, I stated that Joe Joyce, in my view, in order to win this fight, he was going to have to go behind his jab, go to the body very early on, try to mix it up to the body and the head. I thought that he did that very, very beautifully. That was a great thing that he was able to do in the beginning of the fight. And Joe Joyce, one thing I will state about him is this: a lot of people criticize his fighting style. A lot of people look at Joe Joyce and they just think that he's just some guy that is Mr. Stiff Man. And I understand because he does look a little bit stiff. He does not have the greatest of speed in the world when it comes down to it. And sometimes he can overextend his punches. So there is quite a few flaws in Mr. Joe Joyce's fighting style. But one thing I will say is this: there's also certain things that he does that are very good fundamentally. Not only does he have great athleticism, an A plus chin, and on top of that, very, very decent punching power. And I even underestimated his punching power to a degree because I did not truly know how powerful he was because I did not know all in all, what good of a chin Mr. Danny Dubois had. And we all know that Christian Hammer and Carlos Takam, that they were kind of a little bit over the hill. So I was really wondering what his power would look like in this fight. It was very clear after the first round that every round after that, Mr. Joseph Parker had a very tough time dealing with that type of power and dealing with the pressure and the jab and the consistent body work of Mr. Joe Joyce. He pretty much did everything that I stated that he would need to in order to win the fight. He kept his hands up a certain amount of the times. He worked behind that jab very consistently to the body and overall to the head of Mr. Joseph Parker. When Joseph Parker, and I already stated this, when Joseph Parker throws certain combinations, he will always keep his hands down, and that will give you opportunities to get in there and throw certain punches. I stated that in order for Joseph Parker to win this fight, he was going to have to be better defensively than what I had seen him in previous fights. And once again, overall, I was proven correct because Joseph Parker has never had an elite defense. It has always been very, very leaky. That has been the main Achilles heel of Mr. Joseph Parker for years upon years upon years. And overall, Joe Joyce did a very good job of overall attacking the arms and attacking the lower body. Overall, very, very early on, he was getting very good hooks and very good uppercuts in there, as well as good jabs, as well as good overhand rights, and as well as good straight rights. So Joe Joyce was very, very varied in his attack when it came down to it. He was going to the body very early on, and he was going to the head. So Joe Joyce, in my opinion, pretty much was doing everything that I said that he would need to do. And another thing that I overall advised, at least in my fight preview, in my fight prediction, is that Joe Joyce was also going to have to throw the left hook up to the body a certain amount of the times, or excuse me, not just to the body, but also up to the head. And what do you know? What is the final punch that ended up knocking out Joseph Parker or knocking him down for the count? It was the left hook. And the reason why that is because oftentimes Joseph Parker ducks right down into it, or he does not watch out for the incoming left hook. Once again, he oftentimes, when it comes down to it, he oftentimes does not keep his hands up after he throws certain exchanges. He's almost like an Amir Khan in a certain amount of ways. In fact, he's very comparable to Amir Khan. He does not have the weak chin of Amir Khan when it comes down to it, but Joseph Parker relies a lot on his speed. He has very poor defense when it comes down to it, and a lot of the times he does not see incoming counters overall coming straight at him, pretty much just like an Amir Khan. It just is what it is, even though they may fight a tad bit differently here and there, but they're actually very much comparable. And I don't think that Amir Khan, in my view, ever was an elite fighter either, even though at one point in time, maybe you can claim that he was on the A-grade level. It just is what it is. But Joe Joyce, in my view, he did exactly what he needed to do. Every point that I stated in my fight prediction is exactly what Joe Joyce did. And in my opinion, that is the reason why he ended up winning the fight. He broke him down very well. He worked behind the jab very well. Now, once again, a lot of people say about Mr. Joe Joyce when it comes down to it that he is very slow and that, he does not look fundamentally sound. Well, on the surface, he may not look fundamentally sound. And don't get me wrong, there are some things that, in my opinion, he certainly, could burn up on, or all in all, he could certainly crisp up on. His punches, all in all, could be a bit tighter. A lot of the times he is overextending either with that jab or that right hand, or leaving it out there a little bit too long. And that is going to cause him to get hit. Joseph Parker was able to hit him with a multitude of left hooks and overhand rights, which is what I stated that he would be able to land. But it was also very clear that Mr. Joe Joyce studied his opponent very decently well. Because had he not, Joseph Parker probably could have landed a hell of a lot more in this fight than what he actually did. Joe Joyce, as I stated, more than likely was going to become very prepared in this fight, or come very prepared. And a lot of the lefts and a lot of the overhand rights that Joe Joyce was throwing, that Joseph Parker was throwing, one thing you notice about Mr. Joe Joyce is that he usually was rolling with those punches. He may not be the fastest of fighters. He may not be a person that has A-grade foot speed. He may not have A-grade hand speed. And at times he may be a little bit stiff. But one thing that I noticed that Joe Joyce does decently well is that when he's working on that jab and trying to break down his opponents, his head is always usually changing levels, or at least going off to the side. His head is not just always completely in the middle, even though sometimes it is in the middle for a little bit too long, and that will cause him to get hit. We've seen that in the Carlos Takam fight, a little bit in the Daniel Dubois fight, and in a couple of other fights as well. But Joe Joyce at his best, in my view, and this is not me stating that he is an A-plus skilled fighter by any means, but he does have certain fundamentals, in my view, that did help him win this fight. On top of that, he also kept his hands up very decently well in this fight. Did he get hit with certain punches in this fight? Yes, but nowhere near the amount that Mr. Joseph Parker got hit by. He was keeping his hands up in the exchanges and the clinches, overall at a distance, when overall he was even pressuring Joseph Parker. And that, once again, is a very big Achilles heel with Joseph Parker. He does not like to keep his hands up. He has never kept his hands up that well. It showed in the Anthony Joshua fight, in the Dillian White fight especially, and it showed its ugly head once again in this fight. It just is what it is. He has never been a defensive fighter when it comes down. And when I say defensive fighter, I'm talking about someone that knows how to have elite defense, not just someone that is going to be on the back foot. It just is what it is. In Joseph Parker's mind, that's what defense is. He will keep his hands up here and there, but he does not have an elite defense by any means. So it just is what it is. But Joe Joyce pretty much did everything that I stated that I thought that he would do and that he would need to do. He got in a very good left hook in there at the end. He had a very varied attack with that jab when it comes down to it. And all in all, I thought that he had a very good body attack, which eventually led to the downfall of Mr. Joseph Parker. Now, in my view, just to talk a little bit about Mr. Joseph Parker, what did I think all in all that he needed to do overall in order to beat Joe Joyce? Well, like I said, he would probably have to work behind that jab, go to the body, go up top, try to hit him with an overhand right or a right cross, and get a multitude of left hooks in there. And I did see Mr. Joseph Parker try to do that, but I thought that his attack could have been a little bit more varied. And on top of that, it did not seem that Mr. Joseph Parker had the stamina to really compete with the power and to really compete with Joe Joyce's stamina throughout the whole entire fight, because it seemed like Joe Joyce's power and his body attack got to Joseph Parker very, very early on. He did not do a very good job, in my view, of protecting the body. And another big problem with Joseph Parker is that, in my view, he is not a great counterpuncher. He doesn't really know how to parry certain punches, in my view. At least it didn't show up in this fight. And there were certain counters that he would land, but he's not really an A-grade counterpuncher. Joseph Parker is one of those fighters that he kind of throws offense out there, very similar to Amir Khan, in my view, to where he might be able to land counters here and there, but it's mainly just going to be offense for the fact of offense. Kind of overall to keep himself busy and overall just to be busier than the opponent. But if you have a very decent counterpuncher in the ring with him, he's going to have a very tough time. And we've seen that with, Dillian White. We've seen it with, Derek Chisora even a little bit in that first fight. We've seen it with Andrew Ruiz in that fight. And we've certainly seen it here. But the main thing, all in all, that I also stated that Joseph Parker would have to do is that he would have to keep his hands up consistently in this fight. And like I pretty much guessed, he's just not able to do that. He's just never been able to do that, whether it's a stamina issue or all in all, he just was not trained to do it, or maybe a little bit of both. Joseph Parker, all in all, has never been elite defensively. He just never has been, period, point blank. And on top of that, in my view, Joseph Parker did not do enough to gain overall Joe Joyce's respect. I think that he should have had more of a varied body attack early on. He did try to go to the body, but I think that Joe Joyce's power intimidated him too much to the point to where he was not overall willing to risk it, at least trying to push him back. Don't get me wrong, he did try. But all in all, in my view, you were going to have to use your angles a little bit more. And Joseph Parker has never really been great, in my opinion, at using angles. When I'm talking about using angles, that means that sometimes you're going to have to jump to the side of your opponent and use your feet a little bit better, all in all, than what you do. We've seen Mikey Garcia or Vasily Lomachenko or Terrence Bud Crawford or Canelo Alvarez do this. We've seen Mike Tyson do this overall when he used to fight, to where basically he will use certain angles to where the fighter may not be able to hit him, but all in all that he can hit the fighter and counter them in certain points to where they will not be able to attack him back, at least for a certain amount of times. And if Joseph Parker, who has the faster hand speed than Joe Joyce, and on top of that is supposed to have the faster feet, you're supposed to use that to your advantage. But I don't think that Joseph Parker knows how to work angles very well. All he pretty much knows how to do, in my opinion, is sometimes come forward and pretty much back up all in all in a straight line, or just pretty much backtrack throughout the whole entire ring. He doesn't know how to parry very well. He doesn't know how to counter very well when it comes down to it. And he doesn't know how to use his angles. And it pretty much all showed up in this fight. It just is what it is. Now, overall, another thing about Joe Joyce, what I'll say is this, is that, in my view, once again, his better defense in the fight ended up also winning him the fight. Because Joe Joyce may get hit here and there, but at his best, one thing I also state is this, and I also seen this in the Daniel Dubois fight, which is that when Joe Joyce, when there are certain counters or when there are certain punches coming at him, like when Joseph Parker was trying to land clear overhand rights or left hooks, usually either A, he had his hand up when it came down to it, or if it was an overhand right, he was rolling with the punches. And rolling with the punches means that you kind of move overall in the same direction as the punch, not going toward it, but going backward with it. And what that does is that, all in all, that lessens the impact of the punch. And on top of that, he's keeping his hands up. So that's a very great strategy by Mr. Joe Joyce. Once again, is there certain fundamental things that, in my view, he is going to have to work on? Yes, absolutely. But it's enough to maybe beat certain guys like Joseph Parker and who knows, maybe even a Dillian White or an Andrew Ruiz or Luis Ortiz if he faces those guys next. I would love to see any one of those fights. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I thought that Joe Joyce, that he had a very good varied attack, and I thought that that was the reason why he won the fight. I did think that it was only going to go to a decision, but can I say that I am super shocked or surprised by the stoppage? No, I can't say that at all. Once again, Joseph Parker, in my view, he's always had a very leaky defense, and on top of that, Joe Joyce obviously has a certain amount of power that I did not even know that he had coming into this fight. Very, very good power. Certainly a great power. And on top of that, very accurate with his jab, which is always going to set up a certain amount of other punches. And I do give credit to Mr. Joseph Parker. I thought that he showed a valiant effort. I thought that he showed a great amount of heart, but he's just not the fighter, all in all, of what a Joe Joyce is. He's also not the fighter of a certain amount of the other top heavyweight contenders. It just is what it is. And this has been proven pretty much in every single one of his big fights, besides that of the Andrew Ruiz fight. It just is what it is. But anyways, enough overall about Joe Joyce. And the thing is about Joseph Parker, and what does this mean for both gentlemen? Well, what it means for Mr. Joe Joyce, in my opinion, is that he is going to continue moving up in the rankings. He may very well potentially get a title shot after Tyson Fury's next fight, depending on if Tyson Fury stays in boxing or whatever the hell he does. You never know what Tyson Fury is about to do when it comes down to it. And all in all, who knows? He could get a Dillian White fight. He could get an Andrew Ruiz fight, a Luis Ortiz fight. He could potentially get any one of those fights. I would love to see any one of those fights, especially him versus Dillian White. Two British fighters that, all in all, when it comes down to it, you know that they're going to bring the action, decent punches and, have certain flaws, but certain fundamentals that, would make for a great fight as well. That would be a great, great fight. I would love to see that fight. As for Joseph Parker, what do I believe is in store for him? Well, I don't know if there really is much else in store for Mr. Joseph Parker. And after now suffering 3 defeats in your career, one to Anthony Joshua, one to Dillian White, and now a knockout loss to Mr. Joe Joyce, someone who is 37 years old, even though he's a decently fresh fighter, I don't really know if there is much else for Mr. Joseph Parker. Because if we really put him in fights against guys like a Dillian White in a rematch or an Andrew Ruiz in a rematch, I don't think that he's going to beat any of those guys. He certainly wouldn't beat a Tyson Fury. I don't know if he would beat a Deontay Wilder even at this point in time in his career. I don't know if he would beat Anthony Joshua at this point in time in his career. I certainly would not favor him over Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk. And I doubt that he's going to be in title contention after this loss. In my view, and this is pretty much what is for best for Joseph Parker, I think that it is pretty much best that he retire. I think that he's taken a certain amount of damage over his career. And unfortunately, what this means for Mr. Joseph Parker is that not only can he not be remembered as one of the elite 4 heavyweights of his generation in terms of Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, overall, and probably Andrew Ruiz, he cannot be remembered in that mode, or Alexander Usyk, as I forgot about him, but he cannot even be remembered on the Andrew Ruiz or Dillian White level, or now the Joe Joyce level. All Joseph Parker was, in my view, was a very decent contender. At his best, he was a very talented athlete, but he was never a great fighter. He just never was. And overall, this fight has finally proved my point about that. And I have nothing personal against Joseph Parker. I have just heard a certain amount of people for a very long time state that, they always thought that he was a very underrated heavyweight and that all in all that he was one of the best in the world. Well, he's one of the top 10 heavyweights in the world, but in my view, he's really no higher than that. It just is what it is. He's clearly not overall, one of the greatest of the generation. He was another great or another good solid contender, but he was never a great fighter. It just is what it is. And Joe Joyce proved that. Dillian White proved that. AJ Anthony Joshua proved that. And in my view, if he were to have a rematch against Andrew Ruiz, I do not even personally believe that he would beat Andrew Ruiz. But it just is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for both fighters. Overall, I think that it was a valiant effort from both fighters. But Joe Joyce proved that not only all in all was he the fresher fighter, but that he was just the all-around better fighter. Pretty much as what I predicted. So congratulations to Joe Joyce. We will see if he gets a title shot soon, or maybe he'll have to fight a couple of other high-grade contenders. Or when it comes down to it, maybe he will get an immediate title shot, or maybe he'll do something else. Who knows? But we'll see. As for Joseph Parker, in my view, what this means for him, unfortunately, once again, is that he cannot be remembered as one of the elite heavyweights of his generation. He just cannot be. He can be remembered as a good heavyweight. And of course, he was able to win once upon a time the WBO title. But he is not on the same level as an Andrew Ruiz. He's not on the same level overall as a Joe Joyce. He's not on the same level as a Dillian White. I don't think that he's on the same level as any of those fighters. He may not even be on the same level as a Luis Ortiz. But maybe one could debate him over Luis Ortiz just because Joseph Parker was at least able to win a title, when it comes down to it. And he does have a decent win over Andrew Ruiz. But that's even debatable. And in my view, Joseph Parker, it probably would be best for him to retire. I thought that in certain rounds that he looked very poor in this fight. It's obvious that the power all in all was too much for him. I did not think that his gas tank looked good in this fight, and I just think that he's been through too many wars, and I don't think that it's going to get any better for Joseph Parker from here on out. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for my fight review overall. Hopefully I was not too harsh with certain fighters here when it came down to it, but I was just trying to be honest overall like I always usually am. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.